podcast. First of all, apologies. I'm quite aware that we are not as prompt in putting out new articles and podcasts as it used to be the case. There are two reasons for this. One reason is that I'm trying to steer this project back to its origins, so to keep our work to more substantial essays and analyses that take quite a lot of time to prepare. The other reason is, unfortunately, quite prosaic. There is a lot of work that has to be done outside of this project. Now, for a long time, we avoided talking or writing about current affairs, concentrated more on philosophy and maybe perhaps a deeper cause, what we see as deeper causes of current events. But today we'll make an exception because we have a looming Third World War, and it would really be in bad taste not to say anything about it. Also, I want to announce that there is something in writing I'm preparing, something more substantial about this situation in Ukraine and European and American reaction to it, not in the political sense. At the outset, I'll say this: I support Ukrainians, and partly we'll be talking about that in this podcast, but from, I would say, quite unusual angle. Quite unusual for Western analysts. I'm not as Western as most, because I come from the part of Europe where the situation happening in Ukraine right now is not something as alien as it may be for an Englishman or American. So I think some understanding of it is a historical, let's say, given, something that we fortunately or unfortunately know even to an extent intuitively. So the analysis I'll try to provide now will be a bit impromptu, because this is how we do podcasts, to fill in the space between more substantial work on essays. I'll talk about some possibilities that are at work in this situation and that could be realized, unfortunately, and something about what I believe could be overseen by the Western analysts when it comes to Russia and the motives for Russian attack on Ukraine. Now, first and foremost, let us clear something out of the way at the outset. When talking about this war, if you take into consideration what Putin said in his speeches throughout years, somewhere from his first Munich speech that had international impact, up to this speech at the outset of the invasion of Ukraine. If you really watch or observe things from this perspective of understanding what he is saying, I think that you must tone down your focus on pragmatic rationality. What I mean by this? Well, most people, including me, of course, are flabbergasted by complete and utter unpreparedness of Russians for what they did, what they attempted to do. Also, and even more, I am astonished that this doesn't take away from their ultimate aims. and their ultimate aims go far beyond Ukraine. This is the moment where Russia decided, in inverted commas, of course, because Russia is not person, although for some Russians, apparently it seems to be something akin to person. Russia went beyond the discrepancy in its culture, in its very national matrix, as they like to say, civilizational, but I am not convinced that Russia is separate civilization, as Putin and his cronies are, and that it completely rejected West. I think that Russia performed the final act of divorce from Europe. But this divorce is a resolution of the old historical problem. Therefore, divorce is not simply rejection of European Union or collaboration with European Union, or accepting the so-called values of European Union. This is a rejection of the Western civilization built on the bedrock of the Western Roman Empire and Catholic Church. This is the real core of European civilization, no matter how European civilization is now divorced from it and how negligent it's been about it and how rejecting it's been towards it. This is the legacy of the West, and the only true tradition the men of the West, no matter where in the West, can reattach to. Russia, at this point, I think, really declared war on this legacy, which it considers apparently to be a kind of competitor for a global supremacy in a spiritual and material sense. The trouble is, and why people don't understand this in the West, is that there is nothing pragmatic about it, as I already said, at one hand. On the other hand, the material and spiritual in this outlook are not really distinct. What I'm talking about here is the Russian national, or better to say, Russian quasi-civilizational original idea. The idea that Muscovy, or Moscow, or Muscovy as it was when this idea, the kняжество, the principality, that was Russia at the time when this idea came forth, is a third Rome. Now, for those who don't know, the idea is based on understanding, interpretation of Christian eschatological history, where first Rome has fallen under the heresy, that is to say, we Catholics, Latinska heres, Latin heretics, that fell from Christianity, and by this also fell, which is implied, from the right to rule the world in Christ's name. The second Rome was Constantinople, or Tsarigrad, which fell under Turks. And then the mantle of Rome was transferred to a third center, and this third center is Muscovy, and there won't be a fourth one. The implications of this idea is, as far as I can see, completely lost especially to younger people in the West, intellectuals who encounter this idea and who encounter Russian Orthodox Church and Russian political apparatus or Russian political theories in general. I was kind of like keeping a distance towards this because it is abysmally difficult, if not well nigh impossible, to explain this mentality to somebody who was never in touch with it. That is to say, to somebody who was never on the receiving end of the expansion of the country or quasi-civilization, in Russian case, that has this complete identification of the state and the church, as is the case in Russia. Because there is no difference between a Russian Orthodox Church and Russian state apparatus. To comprehend this, you have to see it. I comprehend it, and I can comprehend it for myself very easily, because throughout my life and my people through few generations from the 19th century had to deal with Serbia, which is a midget version of Russia, when this essential structure of church and state is in question. And this peculiar, let's call it spirituality, that exists there. People in the West who never had anything to do with this, who were never at the receiving end, cannot comprehend it. Now, to try to explain now what this is, I'll give an example of what Patriarch Kirill of Russian Church said in his homily, Easter homily, that touched upon the problem of the war in Ukraine. Now he says, among other things, that Russia has calling and a religious duty to protect Russian-speaking people in Donbass, in Donetsk. That's all a classical casus belli, where he is just supporting Russian aggression on Ukraine. But there is more. He defines Russia as standing on the right side of the Lord, whereas the West, and this includes Ukraine, that is Nazis in Ukraine, we'll come to back to that shortly. There's more than meets the eye with that slur, stands on the left hand of the Lord. And anybody who knows Christian iconography, left hand of Jesus is where damned are. So he damned us all with this homily. Let us not forget. He damned us all. The only way, and now I'm not quoting, I'm interpreting, to get to the right side of the Lord is submit to Russia. Now, how is this possible? Is this only that ex-KGB officer role-playing as a patriarch of Russian Orthodox Church is just doing his dirty work for Putin? I don't think so. I think he is expressing the essential eschatological understanding of Russian people, Russian church, and Russian state. These three things being one indistinct thing. The idea is this. There is one people, the people Narod Bogonosac or Narod Christonosac, that means God-bearing people, Christ-bearing people, that has the eschatological calling of being the body of Christ. So it's not that church as a universal church, as a universal union of people, regardless of their ethnicity or origins, is a body of Christ. But one people are, and it's Russian people. And from there, one civilization created by Russians. And in order to be incorporated into this body, this body has to expand and suck you in. And this is the idea of third row. This is what is behind Patriarch Kirill's words. So I'll tell you now something about Nazis. When Serbia attacked Croatia and later Bosnia, they were also attacking Nazis. They wouldn't be doing that if those Nazis admitted that they are in fact Serbs. This means the following. The Serbian state idea denies the existence of Croats as other people than Serbs. They are Serbs that were, for various reasons, lost their identity. Mostly, the conspiracy theory used is that Vatican or Jesuits manipulated Serbs out of the Serbian nation, people, and church. One thing, remember, one free-headed thing. So any kind of division in this body of the Serbian church, state, and people, created by so-called Croats and in fact wayward Serbs, makes it incomplete and makes it wounded and makes it not whole. And the eschatological aim is to push westwards and absorb the wayward brothers. When those brothers decide that they are not what they are saying to them that they indeed are Croats and they are Catholics from 8th century onwards, and Croats very early converted to Catholicism, then they are Nazis. And completely the same qualification that Russians are now using on Ukrainians. And mind you, Ukrainians are Orthodox predominantly, but they are not Russians. And they don't belong, they are obviously their church and their religiosity is different than is the one that radiates from Russian church. They have to be named Nazis because they have to be amputated as a people, and the lands that they inhabit, the space, this is the concept of space, is very important. The space has to be assimilated. So you have this, we had this idea of Greater Serbia. Russians have far grander aims. Now, being on the receiving end of something like this, as I was, and still am, because this idea never dies, it can be defeated in individual instances, but it's constantly popping up again. When you are on the receiving end of something like this, you recognize it when it pops its ugly head up again, in an instant. And this is what's happening in Ukraine. And therefore, I believe that in Ukraine, unfortunately, there'll be a lot more of civilian casualties that will not be just a matter of wayward missile or collateral damage, collateral victims, but victims of genocide, because Ukrainians rejected being Russians. By rejecting being Russians, they rejected Russian Christ. They are not part of that body. And it will get extremely ugly. I mean, one doesn't have to be very wise to understand that it will get ugly for Russians too, because now they'll get bogged down, and gloves will be taken off by defenders. Also, this will be sieges of the cities and destruction of the cities, total destruction of the cities, because they won't give up defending them. And victims will be, I don't even want to project the numbers. Although I think Ukrainians will eventually win. That is to say, I am sure that Russia will not only lose this war. I think Russia de facto started a global war, and and is completely ready to take on the world for the purpose that they put before themselves. There is no cost-benefit analysis here. This is a eschatological war. This is how they understand it. This is how Putin understands it, if I am to believe his words. And there is no stopping at anything. No amount of victims, no amount of damage. Nothing will make them stop. They cannot go back. They crossed the Rubicon. I am not the only one that said that. But I'm trying to provide you with one dimension that is very easily missed by Western observers, because they have no experience of it. And it can be known only from experience. That is to say, you have to see it, and only then you can rationally explain it to an extent. But because it is completely irrational, it doesn't have a rational structure. Its structure is contradictory. Because having the state and the church be the same thing is incomprehensible, in fact. Because it implies, for instance, that high Spetsnaz officer is a kind of angel or something like that. I mean, I am aware that it sounds idiotic and crazy, but in fact it is. This is how it ends up. This is a kind of Christian heresy that comes from the part of the once whole church that I'm not a member of, so I don't claim that I understand how it came to pass. It came to pass a long time ago. It's very deeply embedded. And how it can be resolved, I don't know, but I know it is persistent. You cannot extinguish it. You can win battles against it. You cannot win war against it. Only if it be removed by a deep reforming act, which would be, in my opinion, only act of God's mercy, or if you get destroyed by it, because it is completely either or. And this takes us to our old friend and companion, Kali Tribune, somebody we said a lot of ugly things about and ridiculed, Alexander Dugin. Now, I have to apologize to those who read my articles and essays on Dugin and criticisms, because it was always tongue-in-cheek. I never really understood him seriously. I never taken him seriously. I know he is serious about what he's saying, because this idea is what drives him. And I know that very well. I was not telling that explicitly before, because I kind of wanted to believe that it's not true, but it is. From what I see now, Dugin, who is, by the way, calling for nuclear war, that is to say, he is warning the West that they are miscalculating things, he says, and I paraphrase that Western analyticians think that Russia would use atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, only as an act of retaliation or defense, but that they are miscalculating, that Russian intellect cannot be calculated, in fact, and that they are going for all or nothing, that this is existential threat to Russia, so that they should not be so sure that Russia would not be to want to do the first strike. And observing the situation now, I think he's completely right, and I owe him an apologize. And I should know better, because first thing I noticed about Alexander Gelevich is his profound love of fire. Fire as a metaphor is always present in him. He loves to burn things. He loves to burn himself, I think. So atomic nuclear fire would be quite pleasing for him. That's one thing. The other thing is that Putin's own plan, as he laid it out, the war aims of Russia, are fairly neo-Euro-Asianist, pretty Duginist with all the craziness and all the megalomania Dugin can master. Therefore, not that I'm saying that he is indeed Putin's Rasputin, but maybe he was used as a guy who is spreading the most radical forms of the ideas that Putin himself cannot say publicly. And Dugin was the guy doing this. These kinds of regimes always have. Every regime has somebody who is flying test balloons to see how public will react, especially public in a different part of the world. And Dugin was mostly popular in the West, not so much in Russia. So I think that now Dugin's megalomaniacal eschatology of the Endkampf of final war between sea power and land power is to be taken extremely seriously, because this seems to be the thing that they are doing just now. And it's very hard to predict anything in the future. All I wanted to say here, to point out here, is that no matter how crazy something seems to you, they are capable of doing it. Because Third Rome is a space. It's very hard to explain this, but it's a spatial term. They want space. They want to expand. They have to expand. They are driven by this. It is absolutely irrelevant what is contained in this space. So you can have ruins as far as your eye can see. Kiev turned into nuclear dust. Doesn't matter. It has to be incorporated into a Russian church state people. Three terms are one. This is something we had in Croatia. This is something very typical for some cities that were destroyed, like Vukovar city in eastern Croatia that was under siege, that was brought to ground practically by Serbian army and their irregular cutthroats. The thing is, when that city is now rebuilt and it's back reincorporated in Croatia, while it was in the Serbian hands, nothing was built, nothing was fixed. It was a ruin in which people lived. So the motive was not to take a rational motive, to occupy, to exploit. Nations, when they go to war, have such motives. But this is something different. This is perverted spirituality. This is something that has very strong core, that is completely directed in a crazy direction. And it is working in people even against their own better judgment. And there are periods in history when it is dormant, there are periods in history when it explodes. And then all kinds of calamities happen to those who are in contact with it. Now, it's very hard to ignore small potatoes countries like Croatia and Serbia or Macedonia or Bosnia, Balkans. It's even easy to ignore Ukraine, but it's not easy to ignore Russia. And Russian potential for destruction is not in its armament, it's not in its huge expanse of land. It is in its core idea. Because nothing in the modern and postmodern world can really match it. This is very old, it comes from different world, and it survived modernity. And the modern people, postmodern people ruling Europe, I don't think they really can comprehend it. Some people did in the Cold War, and therefore you have to have this containment that Russia understands as existential threat, but it has to be contained. If you are in Litva, if you are in Poland, if you are Romania, if you are in Ukraine, above all, you have to contain Russia, because Russia will expand. It is not a matter of choice. It is, I wouldn't say destined, that's how they understand it. It is perverted in this way that it has to expand. And in its expansion, and this is very important final determination of this political spiritual drive, is that it is hermetic. Russia is a hermetic society that is closed towards the outside, and it is not very easy to comprehend. There is something that is very peculiar. Those are people who, outside their own country, don't act really in the same way as they act when they are in their country. And that's something I noticed right away when I saw Dugin. For the first time, when I read his translated works, and as I can with some effort read Russian also, and then I see completely different author. This is a different man writing. He in Russian is not the same guy as he in English. This is typical for this mentality. So it always ends with closing in, with the closure, with hermetic, putting hermetic seal on itself, and isolate itself from others, because it cannot comprehend other. It cannot comprehend otherness. When faced with otherness, that does not accept it, that doesn't want to identify with it, which is the case now in Ukraine, it becomes extremely dangerous. Then it is driven into frenzy of destruction, and I'm afraid this is what is in the cards for the very near future. As for the rest of the world, look, Eurasian Empire is understood to be a global empire. And its main enemy is gathering around America, but I think the real enemy is much older. Real enemy is the Rome they said that fell under heresy, which I would very much like to dispute. not in the sense of strictly Catholic Church, but in the sense of the Western Roman civilization upon which Catholic Church put its spiritual roots. And the reason why Russia is terminally wrong is that it considers itself to be a civilization. But it is not. Christian civilization is one in the same way as the church is one. And there is a split from of East and West in it. But this split doesn't make two civilizations, it makes one civilization split in two. That should unify, but it can't, because only God can unify something like that. This will be really going into places that are too deep for me to comprehend. But what I have to maybe risk not being understood, because these things are very important and they have to be said, and not many people are saying them. So Russians in this sense are wrong, and now they are, as you see, they are in conflict with people who are basically a core of their state and their church, in fact, in its original form, because this is a spatial, this is a place where where Orthodox Church of the Eastern Slavic space began, and space, as I said, is extremely important for them. So the whole idea is in contradiction. This is a working, acting contradiction, and as such, it is extremely destructive, and you have not seen anything yet. Trust me. This I say with some confidence. I hope God provides that I am absolutely wrong about this, and then I will happily bow my head in shame. But I'm afraid that's not the case. This is a very dangerous situation, and there is no peaceful resolution to it. Peaceful resolution would be death of Ukraine and their ethnic uniqueness and spiritual uniqueness, and they cannot have this. Or death of Russia. Death of Russia is for Russia an ability to expand, maybe some kind of dismemberment of who knows what. They are going all the way. Of course, I'm not here talking about pragmatic politics. There is always a chance that maybe the people running things now will be overturned by somebody more rational. I doubt it, because this country always had this drive, and it was always the strongest thing pushing it forward. And this is the reason for you Westerners. This is the reason why everybody universally is afraid of them in Eastern Europe. It's simply things stand like that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have anything to do with communism. Bolshevism was just a form of this idea. Because if you so much instead identify church and state, this state ideology can have different forms. It's important that it is fulfilling the eschatological purpose of the state, their special Russian destiny. If you don't believe me, go read Dugin. Osnovi geopolitike, the elements of geopolitics, are best book for understanding. Book is horrible, but it's best to understand what he thinks. And this is it. This is the seems to be that the Russians came to a point where they believe they reached this high point of their history, and where they have to do the final open bid to power, to world power. And as I said, I don't know how will it end, but I don't believe it will be nice to look upon. And we are all involved, especially us in Eastern Europe. We cannot escape. So thank you for your attention. There are a lot more other things in the works that will be coming up shortly.